momentum makes it easy, but the momentum happens because you're in state. So do it while you're in state. Something that commits you to follow through later on. Even if something little, like just scheduling the meeting, do it immediately. I'll give you an example of my own family, of my daughter. So my daughter came to live with me. She's not my birth daughter, but she came to live with me when she was 8 years old. Her name is Jolie, and I love Jolie with all my heart. And I was trying all along the way to plant seeds for her. And, I want to know what her dream is. The arc of your life is based on your dream. Well, her dream was always to be a dancer on Broadway. And Jolie's a great human being, great heart, beautiful, great student. And so she was doing well and taking dance classes and so forth. And then she started going to college and was a 4.0, great student. And she was winning all her dance classes. And 2 years into college, she came home for the Christmas holiday. And I said, Jolie, how you doing on your dream? She goes, what do you mean, Dad? I said, you know what I mean, your dream being a dancer. She goes, well, I'm in college right now and I'm doing really good. I said, yeah, I'm proud of you. And she goes, and I'm doing all these classes and I have these I know. And I said, you win them all. She goes, yeah. I said, that's terrible. She goes, what do you mean? I said, you're not competing with anyone that's making you grow. I said, here's what I think you should consider, honey. Do what I teach. You need to put yourself in proximity of the best people in the world. I think you should move to New York City. I think you should work your tail off. I'll help you with a move. I'll get you set up, but you're going to have to support yourself. You're not going to live off somebody else. And I said, and you should get, I'll help you with this, the best coaches, the best acting, singing coaches, dancing coaches, and then you should go compete on Broadway because Broadway is what you want to be in. You're not going to find that in L.A. And she goes, wow, that's a lot to do right now. I said, yes. I said, I think, honey, I know you respect me. I think sometimes you think I'm a genius, and of course I am. I'm your father. But I said, my real genius, honey, is not unbelievable intelligence. I built intelligence because when opportunity is there, I grab it by the hair. I don't care. Not every opportunity works, but if it's in front of me, I know God of the universe has put it there, and I'm not letting it go by. Some opportunities are little, some are big, but I make myself do it, even if I'm scared, even if I don't have the time, the money, the energy, whatever, the resources, I don't have the people, I still push myself. I said, it's about massive action. I said, I've told you a million times, don't leave the side of setting a goal without doing something towards its attainment. And I think this is massive action. This is what will get it done. She said, wow, when would I do that? I said, when would now be a good time? She goes, now, like in the middle of my university year? I said, yes, you're doing great. She goes, well, you told me I should go to college. I said, I was wrong. You can still go to college, but there's a timeline on a dancer, and I don't think you can wait. She goes, wow, that's a big decision. She said, well, do you mind if I talk to somebody else about it, like in the industry or something? I said, yeah, talk to someone else. People pay me $1 million a year for my coaching, but you should talk to someone else. And she laughed. She goes, no, Dad, I said, who are you thinking of? And she told me a mutual friend of ours who worked for CAA, which is a big agency in the United States, in Hollywood. And so I said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Why don't you call him? And so she said, okay. I said, when would now be good? She goes, right now? I said, right now, while you're in state, call him and ask his advice. And just ask him to shoot you straight. So she leaves the room. I instantly call him. True story. And I said, look, Jay, my daughter's doing this. She's here in L.A. She's winning. I told her she's got to go to Broadway. She's got to compete with the best or she'll never know. He goes, Tony, L.A. is not the dance place. He was absolutely right. I said, then tell her that. And I said, goodbye. Right? So my daughter comes back, true story, and goes, he's busy. His line's busy. I said, don't give up so easily. Keep calling. So sure enough, she calls him. They have about a 45-minute to an hour conversation. She comes back in the room, and Jay says, that's exactly what should I do. I said, well, Father knows best, right? So I took my little daughter, who grew up in Southern California, in Del Mar, California, by the beach, and took her to the worst season in 20 years in New York in terms of weather. It was a brutal winter, and got her set up in this little apartment, and then she had to go to work to help support it, and then I arranged for the coaches for her, and she worked her tail off. And I said to her, honey, I don't know. I believe you have the skill to be a great dancer on Broadway, but I'm your father. I'm biased. The only way you're going to know is put yourself in the arena and compete and learn. And so I said, I just don't want you to have regret. And you're going to have regret if you don't take action. So she did. And a few months went by. In the beginning, it was pretty rough. She'd call, and she felt lonely, and it was tough, and just kept encouraging her. And then I was coming to New York, and I let her know I was coming in about 4 weeks. And she goes, well, Dad, let me surprise you. I want to pick you up. I said, okay, great. I get to the airport, and there's a small limousine car for me. And I'm like, wow, how'd you afford that, right? I was like, okay. And I said, yeah, you know where to go? He goes, yeah, I know. She told us where to take you. And so we go eventually past her apartment. We don't stop. She said, no, she wants you to meet you somewhere else. And we go down to the theater district, and we get to where there's this theater, and it's this play Tommy that Elton John created, Tommy, a Pinball Wizard. And there's my daughter's name. In less than 6 months, she was on Broadway starring in Tommy. How's that for an amazing turnaround, ladies and gentlemen? I'm so proud of her. And, I'd love to take credit, but it's all her gifts and skills. But I got her to be in the environment. I got her to push through. I got her to stretch herself, do what she didn't want to do. And she's took it all from there and made it happen. And now she's made a bunch of Netflix series, and I've got 2 grandsons with her, and she's just a beautiful soul. I'm so proud of her, even if she wasn't my daughter. So it's all about massive action. It's about doing something now, not in the future. The road to someday leads to a town called nowhere. It doesn't exist. You got to do it now or don't do it at all. And don't kid yourself. If you don't do something now, you won't. You'll get out of state. And then the last point that all these people have that I think really made them who they are, the people examples I gave you and so many more that I know, is they wanted something for more than just themselves. Jared was talking about his son. Did you notice that? And, you look around and you see Jeffrey's want to help people locally in his community. And, you could go through each person. They've got something they want to serve. And it's one of the more important lessons I experienced in my life, because I can remember real early in my career, I took off. I had so much belief. I wanted people's lives to change. I went to work for Jim Rohn. And I'd do these talks, and I'd go meet people and convince them to go see him and go for the big program he did, not just the 3 hours. He did this, 3-day program. I told you it was like $1,200, it'd be $10,000 in today's dollars. But I believed so much, and I did well in the beginning, but also I convinced people, I went and got money from the bank to loan me the money. Right? I told you the story, so I thought anybody could do that. Well, when I was there, a lot of people got in state, but then some people, they didn't do it. They canceled the order, bounced their check. And then the company pulled me in, and they didn't believe me. They thought that maybe I was lying or faking or manipulating something, so they didn't pay me for 2 months. Now, this is when I had no money. And so all of a sudden, I couldn't pay my rent. I was eating pasta. I'd go get ketchup at McDonald's and use that as my sauce for the pasta because I literally had no money. And I remember I was driving, I had a little bit of gas left, and I was driving to Orange County each day and doing this business, and I was so frustrated, I was so overwhelmed, and I was sad and angry. And I don't know if you've been in that place where you get really sad and you get angry and you get sad. Anybody been in that little cycle back and forth with your life? And it was near midnight. I was on this 57 freeway, it's called, and outside the city called Pomona, California, which was not a nice community at that time. And there's almost nobody on the freeway, and I kept asking myself, God, what's going on? Why is this happening to me? I had so much momentum, and what's happened? And then I got it, and I literally pulled over on the side of the freeway into the side lane there, off the side. And I used to keep these hardbound journals, physical journals, and I still have it to this day. And I wrote on one page, I still have it, this full thing. I just wrote, "The secret to living is giving." And then I just stared at it and started crying. Because I realized when I started this, it was all about serving. And then somewhere along the way, I got caught up into what am I getting or not getting. If you do that in a relationship, like what am I getting versus what are they getting, the relationship's over, basically. Because it's not about that. A relationship is a place you go to give. A career or a mission is a place you go to give. And what you get from it is who you become. And the inner pride that nothing else matches. So that moment was powerful for me. And I got my act together and I turned things around. I did really well for a while. And about 6 months later, I was new in business. So I made some stupid mistakes. I didn't know how. And I was learning on the job. And I went totally broke. And so I moved into this 400 square foot bachelor apartment in this place called Venice, California, which is a reasonably nice place now, but it wasn't then. It was pretty tough environment, to say the least. And I was washing my dishes in the bathtub and cooking on this little hot plate on top of a trash can in this little 400 square foot apartment. And I remember just feeling sorry for myself. And I used to make fun of people that watch soap operas, and I started watching Luke and Laura on a program called General Hospital. I was there for, the wedding. I was there for Scorpio. I know the whole frickin' story. I was stuffing my face because emotionally I felt terrible. I never used drugs and alcohol because the people in my life were abusive. But I used food like it was a drug. And here I was in this terrible place, and now I'm out of money, and I've not paid my rent. And I'm really starting to freak out. And I had, I don't know, $23, $22, $24 and some change. That was all I had in the world. And I'm starting to realize, holy shit, I have no other income. This is all the money I got left. I got to eat. I got to figure out what to do. So I came up with a pragmatic plan. I said, well, I got to conserve my money, and I got to eat something. I got to load up for the winter here. So I'm going to go to all-you-can-eat salad bar. Maybe one where I have tacos, too. I can get some carbs. And I lived in Venice, which was not nice, but the next city over is called Marina del Rey, and it's a beautiful city on the water. And there's a place called El Chorrito. It's still there, and it's on the water. And so you could go and eat their salad bar for $5.95, tacos, carbs, everything. And it had these views of the ocean and boats going by. And so I decided I'm going to go there. Well, I didn't take my car because I couldn't pay the $3 or $4 for parking. That was too much money, so I walked the 3 miles. Not a big deal. Got the food, and I loaded my plate about this high. Went back for another group of seconds. I mean, I stuffed my face. I'm like, going to have enough food the last few days inside me here for $5.95. And as I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at the water and seeing people have a totally different life than me, and thinking, why is that? Are they more lucky? I didn't understand the path. I didn't understand the things I understand today. But what changed my life was I'm looking out at the water, and my seat was here, there's the water, and there's the front door to the restaurant, and the door opens, and a breathtakingly beautiful woman walks in through the front door. I couldn't help but notice as a man, and then immediately I looked to see, is there a guy with her, as if I had any chance at this, right? It was so stupid. But unfortunately, there was a man with her. He was about 4 foot tall, maybe 3.5 feet tall. He was wearing a 3-piece suit with a little vest and a little tie, and I noticed him hold the door open for his mom, and then I noticed he pulled the chair out for her. And then I noticed that, he was staring straight into her eyes. He was like so present with her while they were talking. And something inside me was moved. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I don't know if it was thoughts about my own mom and me. I don't know what it was, but I was moved by this young man's grace. And so I got up to pay the bill and stuff, and I had no plan for this at all. And as I'm walking out, the table's there, and the woman's back was to me, so I wasn't doing anything to get her attention. I looked at this little boy, and I went up and I shook his hand. I said, "Hi, my name is Tony." And he looked at me and goes, "I'm Charlie." And I said, "Well, Charlie," I said, "I just want to tell you, you're a class act." I said, "I saw how you held the door open for your lady. I saw how you pulled the chair out for her. I see how you're so with her and taking her to lunch like this." And he goes, "Well, she's my mom." And I said, "That's even better, right?" And I said, he goes, "Well, I'm not taking her to lunch because, I'm only 8 or 9, I forget what he was." And he's like, I'm in the 3rd grade, I think he said. So I don't have a job yet, but I'm going to do it in the future. I said, no, you're taking her to lunch. And I had no plan for this. I just reached in my pocket. I'd paid the bill, so I don't know what I had left, $18, $19 and some change. And I just took all the money in the world I had, and I slapped it on the table right in front of him. And his eyes got big as garbage can covers. And he looked at me and said, "I can't take that." I said, "Yes, you can." He said, "How come?" I said, "Because I'm bigger than you are." And I smiled, and he smiled and laughed. I didn't even look at the lady. And then I walked out of that door a different man. And when I walked out, I went to get my car and then realized there was no car there, and I had no money. And so I looked like a crazy, dumb white guy. I probably looked like I was skipping for the 3 miles home because I was filled with a level of joy and energy I can't even describe to you. And it made no sense. I had no money. I'd given the last pennies I have. But I felt lifted. I felt freed from my fear, freed from my scarcity. I got home. I had no money the next day. I know there was no food. I woke up the next morning. There was no fear in me. I didn't have a clear plan, but I had this just faith that, I don't know, something good's going to happen. And in those days, we didn't have email. We had snail mail, right? That was delivered to your house. And I hated the mail because it was nothing but bills that I'd not paid. And then there was a handwritten note envelope. So I was curious. I knew it wasn't probably a bill, so I opened it up. It was from a man that I had loaned $1,000 to when I didn't have $1,000, but he needed it so badly 2 years before. I considered him a friend, and I loaded him the money. He was supposed to pay it back in 3 months, 6 months. And then for the last 3 months, it's been more than a year, I was like calling him, leaving messages, didn't even return my calls, and I needed the money to survive. And the note that I got that morning was a note with a check. And the note said, "Tony, I'm embarrassed. I'm so sorry. When I needed it most, you were there for me. And when you've needed me, I didn't even pay you back. But I felt so bad. I've got the money here. It's $1,000. I've added $200 for interest for you, even though you didn't ask for that. And he said, I just want you to know, I hope you forgive me. And I looked at that check and I just started crying uncontrollably. And at the same time, I felt good too. And I was like, what is this? Why is this? Why is this happening? And in life, one of the most important decisions you make is, what do things mean? Is this the end or the beginning? Is this God punishing you or challenging you? And so I thought, what does this mean? I thought, this happened. I choose to just believe that this happened because I gave everything. And I didn't do it for stars on my chart. I didn't do it for attention. I didn't do it for virtue signaling. I did it because my soul knew it was right. And then I've been rewarded because $1,200 then I could live on for a month. And so the tears were pouring out of me, but joy was pouring out of me. And I got to tell you, I've had so many ups and downs in life like anybody. And I built all these companies in the early days. I was still learning. I had 2 or 3 companies that were on the verge of bankruptcy, and they didn't go bankrupt, thank God. I found a way through. So I've been in times where I should have been in such scarcity. But from that day, when I gave everything I had, from that day on, I've never gone back to that feeling. And it is a gift that goes beyond words. And I hope you'll give yourself that gift. A friend of mine the other day, I've known Mike Keys, the guy I mentioned the other day that I met at Jim Rohn's seminar 45 years ago. And we're still friends. And he was on an airplane, and he said he was sitting next to a guy reading my book, Life Force, on how to transform your energy and your body and so forth, all the doctors I've interviewed and scientists. And the guy was totally into it. And so Mike loves to see what people think without them knowing he's my friend. And he said, what do you think of that book? And the guy went on and on, stem cells and this, and he was so on fire. Mike said, you would have been so happy to see how inspired the man was by the book and telling him what he's going to do with his life. And he goes, what do you think of the author, that Tony Robbins guy? And the guy said, well, he seems like a really good guy, and he's really smart, but also, I don't know if you know, but he donated all the money from this book, which I've done all my books, 100%. And he goes to Feeding America, feeding people, and he goes, that's really kind of cool. And then he said, of course, the guy's rich, so, I guess it's pretty easy then. And Mike smiled from ear to ear, and he goes, what if I told you that I've known that man since he was 17 years old? I know him when he literally had $12 to his name, and he stopped to give the guy $2 on the street when he wasn't sure where his next meal was going to come from. I've watched him do that again and again. And Tony always told me, if you won't give a dime out of a dollar, don't think you're ever going to give 100,000 out of 1 million or 10 million out of a number. It's just not going to happen. So my invitation to you, my friends, is if you want to get beyond scarcity, give. Give something that your heart feels is right. Push yourself to do something that's uncomfortable. And the rewards are spiritual, they're emotional, they're greater than anything you can imagine. And my sincere hope is during these 3 days, you felt like somebody was here to give to you. Because I read your stories, I watched your videos, and my soul was committed to serving you during these 3 days. And I hope this has moved you, and I hope many of you will join me to go further. But if you don't, even if you don't, I hope you feel loved. And I hope you remember that life is a journey. And that all the challenges that are in front of you are just worthy opponents, and that you can conquer them all. If you just change your state, keep learning, and keep growing. And it's been my privilege to serve you. We're not done yet. We have one more piece, but I just want to say thank you. God bless you.